Hi, and welcome back to ITC568, and today we're going to look at some guidance for assignment 3. So this is a presentation on data protection, so a PowerPoint deck or something similar. It's worth 20%, it's due on the 12th of September, and it must be a maximum of 25 slides of content. We'll talk about that towards the end. So the scenario remains pretty all the same. DR Alarms is expanding. We're now building home alarm systems in Vietnam, and we're looking to and exporting them from there to Australia, New Zealand, Singapore. They're still looking at getting this German agent in for the EU, and still considering monitoring. So we're still at that stage of consideration. The design and manufacturing data, which we looked at in assignment 2, comes into play again here. So what we're finding is that all of these assignments link to each other. You're going to use what you've done in assignment 1 and 2 as part of assignment 3. So what you have to do is prepare a presentation to the management of DR alarms to firstly discuss the security and privacy implications of having manufacturing data available in an S3 bucket that can be accessed from different countries. And you've got to consider whether this is going to affect the security posture of DR alarms. Secondly, DR Alarms is now considering using the AWS Asia Pacific Singapore region as both an alternate site for operations, but also as a DR site. So you need to discuss whether this possible solution will act to increase or mitigate risks that you've identified for the security and privacy of company data. The third thing that you need to look at is to discuss the security and privacy implications for DR Alarms of the proposal to provide end-user data monitoring. You also need to discuss any issues of data sensitivity or data storage locations that you think should be considered in relation to that end-user data monitoring. So in other words, where are we going to put it? How sensitive is it? Where does it go? And finally, discuss any issues of data sovereignty that you think might be or should be considered in relation to manufacturing, operational sites, or end-user data monitoring. Okay, so that's the problem. Let's go through the presentation. You've got to do a presentation in either PowerPoint or Google Slides, a maximum of 25 slides of content. So that includes, those 25 slides include the introduction, conclusions, recommendations. It doesn't include references. References can be on additional slides at the end, and they are not included in the slide count. Okay. Each slide should have speaking notes in the notes section, which expand on the information you've got on the slide. If you're using any images or quotations in the slide, they must be referenced on that slide, and the use of a text box for citations is quite acceptable for that. You need a reference list, and you've got to use APA 7th edition referencing as required as normal, and that reference list goes on a set of reference list slide or slides. At the end of the presentation, they are not counted as part of the slide deck limit. Okay, so overall your presentation should highlight the significant points of your argument, but the detail should be put in the speaking notes parts. So let's look at some of the approaches we can use. So question 1, you're looking at discussing the risk assessment report that you've done in assignment 2. And so what you're looking at here is considering the security and privacy implications of having that manufacturing data in an S3 bucket that can be accessed from different countries. And you've got to consider whether this approach affects the security posture for DR alarms. So some hints for this question: go back over your risk assessment and also the table you drew up of the data protection requirements in assignment 1, and look at and again review the security and privacy implications. Do those implications change if you've got that data in an S3 bucket? If you've got it somewhere else, do they change again? And which is the acceptable way to go? Consider what's the value of this set of data to the company. Having that data in that particular S3 bucket, how does it affect the security posture of DR alarms? Why is it there? So there are some of the hints I would give you on that. Now that should allow you to put together that part of the presentation without too many problems. In question 2, DR Alarms is now considering using the AWS Asia Pacific Singapore region as both an alternate site for its operations, but also as a DR site. So will this proposed solution act to increase or mitigate the risks identified for security and privacy of company data? So some hints here. Do you know the difference between an alternate site and a DR site? And if not, need to figure that one out real quick. Now, will an alternate operation site in Singapore increase or mitigate risks? Why? And you need to consider that and discuss it. Would the DR site in Singapore increase or mitigate risks? Again, why? And you need to consider that and discuss it as well. So that's the questions, or the area you need to look at for question 2. In question 3, we're now looking at the security and privacy implications for end-user data monitoring. So as you can see, we've got a whole range of different things we're putting together in this presentation. So it's going to be a couple of areas that you're going to have to concentrate on. So you would need to consider the following: the risk, consequences, likelihood, mitigation, controls to security. And you've done this in the last assignment, right? So this bit's pretty well done. What are the risks to privacy of the end user monitoring data? And you've done that as well. So, you know, you've got a good idea what's happening here. The implications of the location where the data will be collected. So there's, you know, that goes back to assignment 1 and the data protection requirements for each of those locations. And the implications for DR alarms. So, So with that, you really got to start to look at how does this all fit together. You've got most of the work done here, but what you've got to do now is present this in such a way that it makes sense to management. So in question 4, you need to consider any issues of data sensitivity or data storage locations that should be considered with this end user monitoring. So look at the type of data that's going to be collected and determine how sensitive it's likely to be. Look at the data storage locations in view of risk, threat, sensitivity, and the controls required for data protection in that particular location. And then finally give some recommendations about what to do about data sensitivity and data location. And in the final question, you need to consider any issues of data sovereignty that you think should be considered in relation to manufacturing operational sites and end user data monitoring. So you've now got a pretty good idea of the different types of data that's going to be collected by DR alarms. You'll also have a pretty good idea of the sensitivity of the data, of each particular data set, and the value to the company of it. So, you know, you start to have a fairly good feel now for what the data sets you have to play with them and their use and value. So then you need to consider each of those particular data sets and to try and determine, is there an issue of data sovereignty for that particular data set? And then you give your recommendations on what you think should happen in regard to those data sovereignty issues. So again, I would suggest you need to really read through that case study quite carefully. There's, as I said before, lots of bits in there that need to be considered in view of risk. You also need to go through that marking criteria to see what we're looking for in each question, because that will give you some good ideas about the approach to use for each of those questions. Continue to make your notes. If you've got a set of organised notes that you use right throughout these set of assignments, it will make your life considerably easier, and it also starts to give you clues as to what you probably need to do in real life in order to get this kind of answer this kind of question. And also don't forget your references, because that's just as important. Okay, so finally we're again looking at the DR alarms problem. It's in its expansion. There's lots of problems coming up, and this is another interesting example of that real-world problem where you have the additional issue now of doing that presentation to management to say, this is what we've found. This is what we recommend you should be doing. So as we can see, there are problems with considerable privacy and security issues that we're facing here, and you've got to really carefully consider them, particularly when you're looking at a cloud ecosystem and pretty well a global environment. So consider these issues in a bit of detail, then start to formulate how you're going to approach it, along with what you're going to recommend as actions for each of those particular questions. And remember, this is exactly the sort of problem that may well be given to you in the workplace. I hope you enjoy it. I think it's quite an interesting one. You get your teeth into it, and I think you'll have fun. Good luck.